All right, so governments. They're everywhere, right? We deal with them every single day. But let's be honest, trying to figure out how they all work, it can get confusing really fast. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break it all down. Think of this as your user's guide to power, how it really works. You ready? Let's get into it. But before we start comparing different systems, we've got to ask the most fundamental question there is. I mean, it gets right to the heart of why we live in organized societies at all. Why do we even have governments? Seriously, why bother? Well, when you boil it all down, government is basically a tool that we invented. It's a deal, you know? Philosophers call it the social contract. And look, they've been arguing about the fine print for centuries, but the basic idea is pretty simple. We all agree to give up a tiny bit of our total do-whatever-we-want freedom, and in exchange, we get protection, stability, and all the big stuff, you know, like highways or national defense, that none of us to ever build on our own.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the one big question that unlocks everything. Who rules? From there, we'll look at the three main answers: rule by one, rule by a few, and rule by the many. Then we'll add a couple more layers to the whole thing and wrap it up with a fun little debate between some historical heavy hitters.
So if you want to understand any government, seriously, just start with that one simple question. Who holds the power? The answer to that question lets you classify basically every government that's ever existed. It really is the key that unlocks the whole puzzle.
And you know what? The answer almost always falls into one of these three buckets. This is our roadmap. You can figure out the basic setup of any government just by asking, is it one person in charge, a small group, or everyone? So let's start at the top.
All right, first up, the most straightforward structure you can imagine. This is where a single person holds all the power, calls all the shots. The technical term is an autocracy, where one individual has supreme, totally unchecked authority. And this is where you find some of the oldest, most absolute forms of rule in all of human history. Now, monarchy is probably the oldest version of this you can think of, but it's really interesting to see how it's evolved. On one side, you've got an absolute monarchy. Here, the king or queen's word is law. End of story. But then you have constitutional monarchies, like what you see in the UK or Japan today. The monarch is still there, but they're more of a symbolic figurehead. The real power lies with an elected government. And that, right there, is a huge, huge difference. So you might be wondering, what's the real difference between an absolute monarch and a dictator? I mean, they're both one person in charge, right? Well, it all comes down to how they get the top job. A monarch is born into it. They inherit the throne through their family's bloodline. A dictator, on the other hand, they take power, almost always by force. They're not bound by any tradition or history, just by their raw ability to grab power and hang on to it. Okay, so that's rule by one. But what happens when power isn't with just a single person? What if it's held by a small, kind of exclusive group? Well, that brings us right to our second big category, where a tiny inner circle is pulling all the strings. And the word for this tells you pretty much everything you need to know: oligarchy. It's Greek for rule of the few. So in this system, power isn't with a single ruler, and it's definitely not with all the people. Nope, it's concentrated in the hands of a small, privileged group. And the average person? Well, they're on the outside looking in. Now, how you get to be part of that few can look very different. If it's a small group of noble families who are in charge just because of who their parents were, that's an aristocracy. Think of medieval Europe. If it's the religious leaders who are ruling in the name of God, you've got a theocracy, like in modern-day Iran. And if it's all about money, if cold, hard cash is what gets you a seat at the power table, well, then you're looking at a plutocracy. And that brings us to our third and final category, which also happens to be the most common form of government in the world today. We're talking about systems where the ultimate authority, at least in theory, belongs to the people themselves. Yep, we're talking about democracy. Just like oligarchy, the name comes straight from Greek. Demos means the people, and katos means power. So literally, people power. That's the whole idea right there. The citizens are the final, ultimate source of authority. But the big question is, how does that actually work in the real world? Well, there are basically two main flavors. You could have a direct democracy. Think of ancient Athens, where citizens would literally gather in a public square to vote on every single law. As you can imagine, that's kind of tough to do with millions of people. So what's way more common today is a representative democracy.
That's where we, the citizens, elect people to go and govern for us, to make those laws on our behalf. Okay, and this is a point that trips a lot of people up. You hear people ask, is the United States a democracy or a republic? The answer is, it's both. They aren't mutually exclusive. See, democracy answers the question of who has the power. The answer? The people. Republic answers the question of how that power is used. The answer? Through laws and elected representatives. So one is about the source of the power, the other is about the structure. But wait, there's one more layer to this. It's not just about who rules or even the basic structure. You also have to ask how that power is spread out across the country, geographically. And this is a really crucial piece for understanding how a country actually works day to day. And for this, you mostly see two main models. First, you have a unitary system. Think of France or Japan. All the power flows from one central government. It's a very top-down approach. The other model is a federal system, like in the US or Germany. Here, power is officially split, written right into the Constitution, between the national government and smaller regional governments, like our states. Okay, one last piece of the structural puzzle, I promise. In a presidential system, like the one in the US, the people elect the head honcho, the president, in a completely separate election from the legislature. But in a parliamentary system, like in the UK, the people only elect the legislature, the parliament. And then the winning party in parliament gets to pick the executive, the prime minister, from their own ranks. So the key difference is whether those two branches of government are separate or if they're fused together. All right, so now we've got all the building blocks, right? We know about who rules and the different ways that rule can be structured. So let's bring this all to life a bit. Let's imagine a great debate, one that's been raging for centuries, with some historical figures making the case for their favorite system. Which way is really the best? First step to the podium, you've got someone like France's Sun King, Louis XIV. His argument would be all about efficiency and unity. He'd say, look, with one person in charge, you get rid of all the bickering, there's no gridlock, the entire nation can be pointed toward a single grand purpose, and we can actually get things done. But then, a figure like Joseph Stalin might step up to the mic. His argument is that a dictatorship is the ultimate proof of strength. A dictator isn't just born into power, he'd say. They have to prove they're the strongest. And once they're in charge, they can move society forward with a speed and decisiveness that no other system can match. And finally, you'd hear a response from someone like Thomas Jefferson. He'd probably start by admitting, yeah, democracy can be slow. It can be messy. It's definitely not perfect. But he would argue it is the only system that actually respects the individual. He'd say that history teaches us one thing over and over. Kings and dictators almost always end up looking out for themselves. Democracy is the only system that puts its trust in the people to look after their own interests. So, who do you think makes the most convincing case? Is it the promise of efficiency and speed from a single ruler, or is it the dignity and freedom of the people? It's a debate that's not just historical. It's a conversation that continues to shape our world every single day. And we'll leave you with that to think about.